Hi, everyone, and welcome to this month's EMDAC Lunch and Learn. We appreciate you guys joining. I think this is going to be a really informative topic from FEMA. Regina Bennett will be sharing about the upcoming reforms to individual assistance, which, if you've been keeping up with it, is going to be significant changes, although we don't want to think about anyone having to use individual assistance. We don't want to have disasters. We know it's going to happen, and I think that these reforms are going to really be helpful to those survivors. So without further ado, we will allow Regina to get started. I see a few people have their hands raised. If you have comments, you can put that in the Q&A and then lower your hands if you don't mind. So Regina, we'll let you go ahead and get started.
All right, thank you. And I thank you for the invitation. It is my pleasure to come here and share this information with you guys today. My name is Regina Bennett, and I am a voluntary agency liaison group supervisor here in Baton Rouge, Louisiana. And today I'm here to discuss the upcoming reforms to individual assistance. All right, so we'll start off with a background overview of how FEMA individual assistance supports disaster survivors. So what's important today is that we're going to discuss the future of FEMA individual assistance. And what is FEMA individual assistance? Well, following a presidential declaration, FEMA and states, tribes, or territories may provide three primary forms of assistance. That's going to be public assistance to governments and other organizations for response costs and to rebuild infrastructure, hazard mitigation assistance to states to fund projects and programs. These projects and programs may reduce the threats or impacts of future disasters. And what I'm here to discuss, individual assistance. That's assistance to individuals and households to provide limited financial relief and jumpstart their disaster recovery. FEMA is working to implement significant policy changes that will more directly and holistically support disaster survivors in their darkest days. You'll see here the different types of assistance to be provided on or after March 22nd. That's when these changes to our policies will take place. Individual assistance is dedicated to improving the disaster survivor experience and mitigating inequities along the way. So what you see here is a road to recovery, the disaster survivor road to recovery, and there's stops along that road. It starts with the impact of the disaster, where an individual may seek shelter and emergency assistance, then progresses through filing their insurance claim, applying for FEMA assistance. FEMA may come out and inspect a home, provide an eligibility decision, and then eventually along that road, the goal is for the survivor to return to their repaired home or their new home. So disaster survivors and other partners work together across a series of steps to immediately seek shelter and emergency assistance. Individuals may work through their private insurers, if they have that, to file claims. Then they're going to apply directly to FEMA for assistance, and eventually, as I previously said, return to their homes. It takes a whole community of partners and volunteers to make repairs and recovery possible. These new IA regulatory changes are intended to realize decades of effort in delivering individual assistance in a different, more meaningful, and most important, a simple way. FEMA has identified ways to better help survivors. So over the years, we've had survivor surveys, listening sessions, periods of public comment, survivor experience interviews, and direct housing reimagined, where we listen to survivors and other entities and organizations and external partners to see what the problems were. And what we did resulted in our equity sprint of 2021, where FEMA changed program policies to advance equity and reach more disaster survivors. We had our correspondence updates in 2022 and 2023, where we held working sessions that resulted in updates to all of our registration inserts to make them more intuitive and important and informative for our applicants. We also had enhanced application services where we held working groups to identify lessons learned from the 2022 hurricane to more equitably support applicants. And in 2023, we started streamlined registration intake, which simplified the online disaster application to reduce applicant registration by 15% by streamlining the questions for an applicant to answer. These regulatory amendments and provisions did not occur in a vacuum. FEMA has spent the last 10 years actively listening to disaster survivors, hearing their stories, and cataloging their pain points across the entire sequence of delivery. Disaster survivor stories underscored the important limitations and barriers to our current IA policies at FEMA. These policy changes are intended to accelerate holistic recovery for disaster survivors and expand assistance in those survivors' darkest days. We cannot emphasize enough that these are major reforms and transformational change to how FEMA assists disaster survivors. So now we're going to move on specifically to the regulatory updates. What FEMA is changing. FEMA is simplifying processes, removing barriers to access services, and increasing eligibilities for certain types of assistance under our individual assistance programs. This marks a significant step toward improving the disaster survivor experience. So what does that mean? Overall, FEMA is simplifying our processes, removing barriers, and increasing eligibility. These regulatory changes will take effect for all disasters declared on or after March 22nd, 2024. How FEMA is reforming individual assistance. We want to help survivors recover faster, and FEMA will make significant updates to our individual assistance program. And FEMA is framing these updates to its individual assistance programs as 3 buckets: establishing new benefits, cutting red tape and expanding eligibility, and simplifying the application process. Under establishing new benefits, future survivors will receive cash assistance in their times of greatest need to cover serious needs and displacement, giving them the flexibility to assist with their most pressing disaster-caused needs at that time. With cutting red tape and expanding eligibility, future survivors will be able to receive assistance to meet their unique needs, including secondary effects of disaster-caused damages, underinsured damages, computing devices, and accessibility-related items. And under simplifying the application process, future survivors will have a lower burden when applying for and receiving assistance. Disaster survivors will spend less time requesting and waiting for the assistance that they need so much. On these next slides, I'm going to walk you through the detailed changes and let you know that this is intended to be a broad overview of the changes that are coming on or after March 22nd, 2024. FEMA is creating a series of communication materials to include one-pagers, fact sheets, talking points that will eventually be circulated for your reference and convenience. What you see on the screen here is the official Reforms to Regulatory Changes one-pager, and you may find it helpful now and throughout the conversation with stakeholders and partners, and as a reference and to fact check the changes that are being implemented. Changes to establish new benefits. We're going to standardize serious needs assistance. FEMA is standardizing assistance for serious needs by making a $750 payment available in all disasters receiving individual assistance for eligible households to access essential items like food, water, baby formula, and other emergency supplies. Under our current process, after a disaster, the state, tribe, or territory can request critical needs assistance from FEMA if they so choose. If FEMA approves the request, eligible disaster survivors can receive what's called critical needs assistance as a one-time payment of $700 to address their most serious needs. Under the future process, serious needs assistance is standardized to provide eligible survivors with serious needs caused by the disaster with a $750 payment, and that a payment is going to be adjusted annually to account for inflation. Survivors who FEMA deems not yet approved for this assistance will be able to provide additional information that could make them eligible. Under our current process, for some reason, if an individual does not prove that they are eligible for our critical needs assistance, there's no way for them to get that in the future, but we've changed that and we're allowing individuals to provide the additional information that we require to determine their eligibility and just not tell them that they can't receive the assistance. So, sorry. Let me go back. Okay. We're also creating a category called displacement assistance. This new form of assistance is designed for survivors that cannot return to their home following a disaster and provides them with financial assistance that can use flexibility to pay for their immediate housing needs. The placement assistance will be provided to eligible survivors with upfront funding to help them afford an immediate housing. Please hold on one moment. Someone just started vacuuming by me. I apologize.
We can count this as the break. And while she's waiting, if there's anyone who can't see the ASL interpreter, who needs to be or having difficulty seeing it, they could raise their hand and I'll move them over.
All right, I'm back. Sorry about that. I apologize. It's lunchtime and the cleaning lady started cleaning the area that I work in. So let's get back into displacement assistance. Displacement assistance will provide eligible survivors with upfront funding to help them afford an immediate housing option of their choice post-disaster. This benefit is going to bridge the gap for those who need rental assistance and helps keep survivors housed in the aftermath of an event. For this change, we acknowledge that not all survivors can return to their homes following a disaster, and displacement assistance will be available for survivors whose primary residence is uninhabitable or inaccessible, for greater immediate housing needs and flexibility to choose what is best for them and their families. Changes to cut red tape and expand eligibility. This is one of the most significant changes that I've seen out of all of these changes is going to be simplifying our other needs assistance. As a voluntary agency liaison group supervisor, it's always been a major pain point for me and my staff to explain to an individual that they have to apply for the Small Business Administration disaster loans to continue through our process. We're eliminating that step. The Small Business Administration will still be available to provide low interest rate disaster loans to individuals so they choose if they choose to avail themselves of that, but it is no longer a part of our process because previously securing a loan from SBA was the process, and it was also a major pain point for anyone who was trying to seek assistance. So under these new rules, survivors can now qualify for personal property or transportation assistance from FEMA without having to apply for the SBA loan. We're also trying to help individuals that are underinsured. For those families or individuals who possess insurance, but their insurance falls short in meeting all of their financial and housing needs. Survivors who receive an insurance payment for damages to their home may be eligible to receive additional assistance from FEMA if their insurance payment is more than FEMA's congressionally established maximum. So, for instance, our current congressionally mandated maximum is $42,500 for housing assistance or other needs assistance. If an individual has insurance and they receive $42,500 or more under our current process, they would not be eligible for any additional FEMA assistance. But moving forward, survivors who have insurance but do not receive enough from their insurance company to cover their damage can receive additional money from FEMA to repair their homes and repair or replace their personal property. So we're no longer saying if you get our maximum amount in insurance proceeds, you can't get any additional funding. We're saying that we're still here to help you if you receive insurance and it did not meet your need to be able to recover to a new normal. We're expanding our habitability criteria. Under the program, as it currently exists, FEMA's assistance to repair a house is limited to the repairs that are necessary to make it habitable. We're simplifying the regulatory definition of habitability to broaden eligibility to include repairs to homes with pre-existing conditions that were further damaged by disaster. An example of this that I see on every disaster that I've worked, it's going to be a situation with an individual who has a house with damages to their roof. Currently, under our current program and how it's written, if our people come out and do an assessment of the damages that are caused by the disaster, they are not going to award any funding to the individual for damages to that roof if we can clearly see that there was pre-existing damage, even if it was further damaged by the disaster. So an individual will get an award to, let's say, replace a quarter of their roof. But they will call a contractor out, and a contractor isn't going to patch the roof. It's also not in the best interest of the survivor to have a patched roof. So they never received what they needed from us to fully recover and move on to their new normal. But under our future process, FEMA can provide repair money for portions of the home that were already damaged, but that were made worse by the disaster, as long as those areas need to be repaired for the home to be safe and to live in again. We're also making changes in accessibility improvements. FEMA is taking a charge of protecting and empowering our survivors with disabilities very seriously. And we're making accessibility improvements under our individual assistance program to better support disaster survivors with disabilities. Assistance to repair a home is generally limited to the repairs needed to bring the home to the pre-disaster design. But under this new rule, FEMA will pay for improvements if a survivor whose home is damaged in a disaster needs disability-related improvements, even if those features were not present prior to disaster and the disability was not caused by the disaster. So, for instance, if an individual needs handbars or needs a ramp built, and that did not exist prior to the disaster, but we can clearly see that the individual would need these things and would benefit from these things, we can provide that assistance to get them back in their home with the access and accessibility that they need to be able to live their new normal in their home. We're also simplifying assistance for self-employed individuals. Under our program, and have heard consistently that assistance to reimburse for personal property loss is very much limited. Currently, anyone who's self-employed, whose work requires tools for them to do their job, if their tools are damaged during a disaster, they didn't receive anything from FEMA. They instead could seek a low-interest disaster loan from the SBA, or they could seek support from nonprofits. The changes that we've made to our program will allow for us to provide assistance for those tools that self-employed individuals need to do their work. For example, right now, if a self-employed photographer loses their camera, they receive nothing from FEMA. In the future, FEMA will be able to reimburse them for the cost of the new camera so that they can continue in their line of work. We're also expanding assistance for computing devices. We understand that in this modern world, technology is a given and computing devices are integral to staying connected, whether that's with family, friends, loved ones, accessing community services, or for professional needs. To that end, survivors who have computers that are damaged in a disaster can receive assistance to repair or replace it. They can also receive assistance for additional computers if it is needed for work, educational, or accessibility purposes. We also want to note that computers are a critical piece of equipment for those with access and functional needs, and making this change is even more important. Our next category, changes to simplifying the application process. So we're striving to simplify our process, number one, by removing barriers for late applications. We realize that not everyone can fill out applications on time. When a hurricane is still causing flooding in your home and your roof is leaking, you may not have the time or resources to submit the required documentation. We're consciously removing barriers for late applications. Currently, survivors must provide justification if they want FEMA to consider their application after the deadline. Going forward, survivors will still have to tell us why, but instead of making them submit significant amounts of additional documentation to justify why, we'll talk to them by phone, in writing, or in person on their doorstep or at a disaster recovery center to get a sense of what caused them to be late, and if justified, will allow the late application to move forward. We're also streamlining temporary housing assistance applications. We're streamlining this process to give survivors additional time and assistance to develop their required permanent housing plan. Additionally, FEMA will no longer require survivors to document their pre-disaster rent or income to receive continued rental assistance. This was a major pain point for individuals with having to get that documentation together when their homes were flooded or if they are removed from their homes and don't have access to those documents. Currently, we require survivors to also identify a permanent housing plan. And if they're requesting that, if they're requesting that assistance in the days after disaster, this information we've realized is this early in the disaster is not reliable because survivors are not aware of what the housing market in their community may be in the months, weeks, or days after the disaster. The information provided is not informative to FEMA when evaluating ongoing needs. So under the new rules, we're providing additional time before we ask survivors for that information. This will result in more accurate information, aid in FEMA's ability to evaluate each individual's needs for rental assistance. We're also removing pre-disaster rent and income requirements because, again, we found that disasters so drastically change housing markets and conditions that the information is not informative when evaluating a survivor's needs. We're also simplifying the process for appeals. For survivors who do not agree with the type or amount of FEMA assistance offered, they will realize a simplified process. We've heard directly from our partners as well as disaster survivors that the appeals process was too lengthy and cumbersome. And now survivors who do not agree with the type or amount of FEMA assistance offered will experience, as previously stated, a simplified process when appealing that decision with FEMA. When a survivor appeals decisions, FEMA will no longer require them to sign a written appeal letter or provide significant levels of documentation. Instead, survivors will contact us via their preferred method of communication and simply provide any necessary information needed in order to appeal the decision. So what that means, for instance, if an applicant previously wanted to appeal, they had to write a letter, they had to sign that letter, and they had to send that letter into us for us to process their appeal. What we're saying now is that individual can call us and say, I don't agree with the amount that I was awarded and I would like to appeal. What do I need to do? And we can simply tell them that we need to speak with their contractor to verify whatever may have been missing, and they can provide the contractor's number to us over the phone, and we can move forward with contacting that contractor and getting that information without the individual having to go through all the steps previously discussed with writing a letter, signing the letter, making sure that the letter has all of the required things that we previously stated that it needed for it to be a legitimate letter. We've removed all of those barriers to just make it simpler for us to have one-on-one interaction with the applicant and allow them to provide us what they need, what we need directly to process an eligibility decision. We're also reopening registration periods. So sometimes during a disaster, counties that are impacted are added to the disaster declaration after the initial registration period. And in order to be inclusive and equitable as possible, survivors will have the full 60 days to register, and that 60-day time clock will start based on when the county or parish that they lived in at the time of the event is added to the disaster declaration. In the past, this has been implemented inconsistently, and now that it's written into policy, it won't be. How regulation changes support FEMA's reform strategy. So there were overarching problems that survivors face. An increasing number of Americans are facing natural disasters each year as our temperatures rise, yet they often lack the support necessary to fully recover. FEMA and our other federal partners heard from disaster survivors nationwide about this moment in their lives and where the government process could have been simpler and more powerful. Disaster survivor pain points were inconsistent information, burdensome application process, and limited responder autonomy. So these reforms did not occur that we've decided to make as an agency in a vacuum. We've listened to our partners, we've sat with survivors, and we've dissected the entire disaster survivor recovery experience to better reflect disaster survivor needs rather than top-down mandates that fit bureaucratic needs and norms. At FEMA, we know that inconsistent information and a burdensome application process set survivors back in their road to recovery. And we're seeking to empower our partners and disaster survivors alike for a speedier, more robust recovery. So that is the end of my presentation about the reform changes to individual assistance. Are there any general questions that the audience may have that I could answer at this time?
Thank you, Regina. We do have a couple of questions about is this presentation available? Will you be able to send this to us or links to this information, I guess, in written form?
What I won't be able to send out the presentation, but what we can do is get the organization set up to be able to receive all of those fact sheets, one-pagers that I had discussed earlier in my presentation, so that you guys can have the information that's needed to be able to dissect these changes and then provide them to whoever you guys might be supporting in the community.
And for that, I just want to say, if you are registered for this webinar, or anyone who's registered for webinars before, say lunch and learns, or on our EMDAC email list, you will receive a recording of this. You will also receive the information. We have an EMDAC document that we collect resources that you can go to anytime. So whatever she sends to us, I'll add that to that doc and push it out to you guys in emails. So that'll be available.
I can also send you my email address. I am, a voluntary agency liaison, so it is my job to stay connected and provide this type of information to organizations so that they can best be prepared when a disaster happens. So I can send you, when I send you the documents, is my email as well. You're free to share that information, and individuals can if they have questions or requests, I can also receive that stuff via email and send it out. I don't have a problem with that. It's my pleasure to be able to help in that regards.
Do you have a question from Christopher? Are any of these changes or new processes retroactive to previous storms or existing programs, or would they only apply to new declared disaster post March 2024?
That's correct. They will only apply to new disasters that happen on or after March 22nd. Nothing is retroactive.
Is this applied throughout the United States or just here in New Orleans area?
It's throughout the area that we cover, which would be the United States and our territories that are covered by the United States under FEMA.
And where can I get? I think this might not be a question that you can answer. It has to do with sewage, water. That might be something that we're gonna have to take it offline. Bridget says this is amazing. Will be so helpful for people with disabilities. And then just another, this will be emailed to everyone who is registered for this lunch and learn. And so I think we've answered any more questions. Y'all can put that in the Q&A now. I don't, oh, wait, let's see. Thank you. Okay. Before people leave, I do have a poll that I want guys to answer very short. 2 questions. Trying this technology out, expanding my technology reach. So I'm gonna go ahead and launch that poll. If you guys can answer that, I'd appreciate it. And we'll just give a couple minutes for people to answer the poll that's on the screen. We've got 30 seconds left to answer the poll. Okay, guys, we're gonna go ahead and end the poll, and we will be sending out this information again, to all of you. I want to thank Regina for this great, information and for sharing this with us. And Regina, just one last thing. I think that, I just want to make sure that people know that they're still taking public comments on these changes, right?
Yes, ma'am, that is correct.
Okay, so if you're interested in giving public feedback, comments on this, that's still until the 22nd? Is that correct? March
Yes,
22nd?
yes, ma'am.
Okay, so if you want to give public feedback, we encourage you to do so. So that will wrap up our lunch and learn, and we will be in touch. Thank you, guys.